Greetings. Do what thou wilt should be the whole of the law. I'm Lexi Eve, and welcome to another video on Magic in Theory and Practice. Today, I am going over Chapter 16a of the Oath. Enjoy. The magical oath, like the magical motto, is a lifelong magical binding. But unlike the motto, which binds you to fulfill it, the oath is something that you must choose to live up to on your own merits, or else face some serious and dire consequences. Though, Crowley writes, quote, "A real magical oath cannot be broken. You think it can, but it can't. This is the advantage of a real magical oath," end quote. Of course, now, this is referring to specific, quote, real, unquote, oaths, such as crossing the abyss, or swearing to a deity that you are going to do something. In such cases, once taking these kinds of oaths, there is no way out, and you inevitably must fulfill your promise, even if it kills you, and you must go through many incarnations trying to avoid doing what you swore to do. You will inevitably give up resisting and accept the path that the powers lay out before you in order to accomplish the goal as laid out in your oath. For example, Liber Cheth, a text I describe as a companion text to Crossing the Abyss, has two quotes which back up this idea. Verses 7 through 11 state, quote, "Now therefore that thou mayest achieve this ritual of the Holy Grail, do thou divest thyself of all thy goods. Thou hast wealth, give it to them that have need thereof, yet no desire toward it. Thou hast health, slay thyself in the fervor of thine abandonment unto Our Lady. Let thy flesh hang loose upon thy bones, and thine eyes glare with thy quenchless lust unto the infinite, with thy passion for the unknown, for her that is beyond knowledge, the accursed one. Thou hast love, tear thy mother from thine heart, and spit in the face of thy father. Let thy foot trample the belly of thy wife, and let the babe at her breast be the prey of dogs and vultures. For if thou dost not this with thy will, then shall we do this despite thy will, so that thou attain to the sacrament of the Grail in the chapel of abominations." End quote. And also the second part that backs up, verse 19, quote, "Wherefore I charge you that ye come unto me in the beginning, for if ye take but one step in this path, ye must arrive inevitably at the end thereof." End quote. But again, this type of oath is a rarer thing than the general magical oath. Magical oaths are taken to primarily join magical orders, advance in grades of said orders, and also on a personal level to accomplish some end. I will go over the chapter at hand from Magic in Theory and Practice, and also use oaths from the Magical Order AA, which are made public, such as the probation grade, to help explain this concept. Let us turn our attention to the chapter. Quote, "The magician armed and ready stands in the center of the circle and strikes once upon the bell as if to call the attention of the universe. He then declares who he is, reciting his magical history by the proclamation of the grades which he has attained, giving the signs and words of those grades. This is not merely to prove himself a person in authority, it is to trace the chain of causes that have led to the present position, so that the operation is seen as karma." End quote. This idea is very important, as it is the same method used in tracing events from past lives or through one's magical diary this incarnation in order to see key moments which, like a thread, through the years, tells the magician something about their journey on the path and what their will may be. By looking to the past, we can sometimes see glimpses of the future. Quote, "He then states the purpose of the ceremony and proves that it is necessary to perform it and to succeed in its performance. He then takes an oath before the Lord of the universe, not before the particular Lord whom he is invoking, as if to call him to witness the act. He swears solemnly that he will perform it, that nothing shall prevent him from performing it, that he will not leave the operation until it is successfully performed, and once again he strikes upon the bell. The Lord of the universe," end quote. The Lord of the universe, in my opinion, is either Heru-Raha or Chaos, or maybe even Baphomet, or just the divine light. But regardless, we are talking about very high powers in this scenario. Striking a bell vibrates the air in all directions. It causes a big change in the environment and psyche. It reverberates endlessly through infinity and has the power to banish and invoke, as well as to start or end a ceremony, or like the quote just said, to get the attention of the universe. A single strike corresponds with the number 1 Kether, the divine light. thus signaling that we are doing something of divine providence. Quote, "Yet having demonstrated himself in that position, at once infinitely lofty and infinitely unimportant, the instrument of destiny, he balances this by the confession, in which there is again an infinite exaltation harmonized with an infinite humility. He admits himself to be a weak human being humbly aspiring to something higher, a creature of circumstance, utterly dependent, even for the breath of life, upon a series of fortunate accidents. He makes his confession prostrate before the altar, in agony and bloody sweat. He trembles at the thought of the operation which he has dared to undertake, saying, 'Father, if it be thy will, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done.'" End quote. Two examples you could see of this are in Crowley's writing of Liber Pyramidos and also the invocation of Horus. The confession is used. It humbles and brings about a sense of humility, and it opens you up to a higher force, something that is beyond you, letting your consciousness know that you are not yet the great I am. You need to take this process, this oath, this ceremony to achieve something higher. Also, in Miguel de Molino's spiritual guide, the Gnostic idea of confession can be very, very powerful, as I'll talk about in a few moments in more detail. But before I get to that, I'll just say, as a little teaser, the idea of a confession really, one, it lets somebody else, or if you're just talking to deity, it at least allows you to admit and verbalize out loud things that you have done wrong or in ways that you feel unworthy. And this in and of itself helps release your psyche from some of the stress and strain that we put upon ourselves for perfectionism. I'll get more on that in a second. I'll get back to it. Quote, "Of course, this is for the beginner. As soon as it is assimilated as true, he will say, 'My will, which is thine, be done,' rather than, 'Father, if it be thy will.' Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done." So instead, once they mature into an adept, they will say, "My will, which is thine, be done." And ultimately, no more distinguish mine from thine. A sympathetic change of gesture will accompany the mental change. End quote. The concept of the confession deserves its own video. In short, it does as the chapter says, invokes humility before the divine, and helps to let go of baggage of both ego and karma that we carry on our shoulders, weighing us down and causing emotional strife. Note that in the beginning of one's path, the magician sees everything of the divine as different from themselves. Yet, later on, though still seeing the universe as separate, the will of the magician and of the divine are one and the same. And later on still, above the abyss, there is no difference. The magician and the universe are in perfect union. Their will is God's will. Essentially, they are the divine. After this, the man has become a magician and they take their oath. In this process may be tweaked by necessity based on the order one is taking their oath, or the situation, and the nature of the ceremony. After this, Crowley writes that invocations may take place. So based on the nature and contents of the oath will determine what kind of invocation you should do. If the oath is for health, maybe you invoke Mercury. For power, Mars. For love, Venus. Any deity that fits the association should suffice. We now get some information about the nature of magical oaths. Quote, "The oath is the foundation of all work in magic, as it is an affirmation of the will. An oath binds the magician forever. Thus, should one, loving a woman, make a spell to compel her embraces, and tiring of her a little later, evoke Zazel to kill her, he will find that the implications of his former oath conflict with those proper to invoke the unity of the godhead of Saturn. Zazel will refuse to obey him in the case of the woman who he has sworn that he loves. To this, some may object that, since all acts are magical, every man who loves a woman implicitly takes an oath of love, and therefore would never be able to hurt or murder her later, as we find to be the not uncommon case." End quote. This is a perfect chance to pause and put in my piece about love spells, which I don't think I've done on this channel. Maybe I have, but it's worth saying again then. I think using ritual magic for love is one of the most abhorrent and stupidest things an immature magician can do. If you cannot find love from another person, then it is because you either haven't met the right person, or there is something just wrong with you that needs to be fixed. In either case, I am 100% confident that Bhakti Yoga with Nuit as one's focus should help correct some of your baggage, unless you have a lot. If you follow the way of Bhakti Yoga, you trust that the divine will provide for you exactly what you need when you need it. You can then go about your path focusing on your great work as a magician, and accept what is given and taken away as it happens, because that is what you need. Anything else to me feels like a crying baby screaming because it does not know how to get what it wants elsewise. Then there are two main types of love spells, and I think both are just as bad. One, you know who you want and you use ritual magic to make them love you. This is probably the worst of the two because you're infringing directly upon the will of another person. The other use of ritual magic for love is generally to bring the right person to you without naming that person. You might set up parameters and just have the universe bring the right person to you. This is still not good, because if they did not enter your life without your karmic meddling, they weren't supposed to according to the natural order of operations. You can argue that as a magician, your will was to make this happen. And while there may be a 0.1% chance that this might be true, most probably it is just a justification of the ego which wanted to be loved. In this latter case, I've seen people do it and then years later go through either the worst of breakups or live with the person they're stuck with and they're miserable. Because either they weren't ready for this relationship and they wanted it to happen, or it just wasn't right in some other way. Anything done because of ego is doomed to fail inevitably. That's my view. Take it or leave it. Let's go back to the chapter and the example Crowley gave. He gave an extreme example, and I believe that when you bring things to the extreme in hypothetical scenarios, it allows you to see more clearly whether or not something is good or absurd. In this case, causing a person to fall in love with you is a binding contract. If you tire of that person, you cannot simply dump them. I mean, physically, yes, you can, but you're going to get hit with the karmic rebound, and you're going to have to account for that. If you would destroy them to end that contract, well, you clearly never loved them to begin with, because if you love someone, you will do everything you can to protect them. So moving right along with the chapter, quote, the first step of the aspirant towards the gate of initiation tells him that purity, unity of purpose, is essential above all else. Do what thou wilt strikes on him, a ray of fierce white flame consuming all that is not utterly God. Very soon he is aware that he cannot consciously contradict himself. He develops a subtle sense which warns him that two trains of thought which he had never conceived as connected are incompatible. Yet deeper drives, do what thou wilt. Subconscious oppositions are evoked to visible appearance. The secret sanctuaries of the soul are cleansed. Do what thou wilt purges his every part. He has become one only. End quote. So this quote is also very important, as you will see. The contents of one's magical oath is both in conformity with their wills to take it, and I'm speaking of oaths in a magical order, such as AA, which I'll get to at the end of this video. And more importantly, these oaths have clauses which clear the way of anything internally which bars one from doing their will. A magician must know themselves utterly, and take that self-knowledge they gain from their practices to turn it into action, their will. Any ideas which arise or actions they try to take which are not in conformity with their will must be purged. Quote, his will is consequently released from the interference of internal opposition, and he is a master of magic. But for that very reason, he is now utterly impotent to achieve anything that is not in absolute accordance with his original oath, with his true will, by virtue whereof he incarnated. End quote. This is absolutely true according to my experience. Though, let's say a master of magic, a person who attains past a certain point, discovers that they cannot use their magic for anything that is not one with their will once they reach that grade. They may try, and it will fail. If they persist, the gates of insanity will soon greet them. Quote, in the case of the Master Therion, he had originally the capacity for all classes of orgia. Side note, orgia does not mean sex. Orgia means spiritual, ritual, magic, praise to the highest. It literally means a magical operation. To continue the quote, In the beginning, he cured the sick, bewitched the obstinate, allured the seductive, routed the aggressive, made himself invisible, and generally behaved like a young man about the town on every possible plane. He would afflict one vampire with the sending of cats, and appoint another his private enchantress, neither aware of any moral oxymoron nor hampered by the implicit incongruity of his oaths. But as he advanced in adeptship, this coltishness found its mouth bitted. As soon as he took serious oaths and was admitted to the order which we name not, those oaths prevented him using his powers as playthings. Trifling operations, such as he could once do with the turn of a wrist, became impossible to the most persistent endeavor. It was many years before he understood the cause of this, but little by little he became so absorbed in the work of his true will that it no longer occurred to him to indulge in capricious amusements. The case offers two instances of this principle. Frauder Perturabo specifically swore that he would renounce his personal possessions to the last penny, also that he would allow no human affection to hinder him. These terms were accepted. He was granted infinitely more than he had imagined possible to an incarnated man. Every treasure that he had on earth was taken away, and that, usually, in so brutal or cruel a manner as to make the loss itself the least part of the pang. Every human affection that he had in his heart, and that heart aches for love as few hearts can ever conceive, was torn out and trampled with such infernal ingenuity in intensifying torture that his endurance is beyond belief. Death dragged away his children with slow savagery. The women he loved drank themselves into delirium and dementia before his eyes, or repaid his passionate devotion with toad-cold treachery at the moment when long years of loyalty had tempted him to trust them. Now, having endured to the end, being master of magic, he is mighty to work his true will, which will is to establish on earth his word, the law of Thelema. He hath none other will than this, so all that he doth is unto this end. All his orgia bear fruit. What was the work of a month when he was a full major adept is today wrought in a few minutes by the words of will, uttered with the right vibrations unto the prepared ear." End quote. This is the power that a magical oath and discovering one's will has in store for you as a magician. It is as beautiful and as terrible as all this that I just quoted. Ignorance is repaid with savagery, obedience with blessings and bliss. Before closing the chapter, let's look at the Probationer Oath of AA, which I'll read through aloud and then break down. So you'll see on your screen now the Oath of the Probationer. Quote, "I," then the person will write their legal name, "being of sound mind and body, on this such and such day, year, sun sign, and moon, whatever degrees of that sign they're in, do hereby resolve, in the presence of the motto of their neophyte, a neophyte of the AA, to prosecute the great work, which is to obtain a scientific knowledge of the nature and powers of my own being. May the AA crown the work, lend me of its wisdom in the work, enable me to understand the work. Reverence, duty, sympathy, devotion, fidelity, trust do I bring to the AA, and in 1 year from this date, may I be admitted to the knowledge and conversation of the AA." You'll sign your legal name, or at least your legal signature, and then you'll choose your magical motto. Around the corners, I'll talk about that. On like the top left, it says liberty, power, destiny. On the top right, life, putrefaction, death. I'm going to come back to these four corners because they're also pretty cool and there's something important going on there. So right off, this particular oath begins with the first person word, quote, "I," followed by the candidate's legal name. This is a direct reference to the ego, which must take the first step to its own demise. If there is a self-sacrifice concept in Thelema, it is this, and unlike the martyrdom of Christianity. To my mind, the hanged man represents this process of taking the magical oath. That is, if anything, Thelemic self-sacrifice, and it ties into INRI and the crucifixion. The very next thing stated is, quote, "of sound mind and body," end quote. This I cannot stress enough, as it means the newly minted probationer should have already gone through the process of working out their baggage, and they should be in a stable place in their life. If a person taking this oath has not already gone through such baggage, sorting and dropping it, or if they are in dire need of therapy but have not gone in to get the help they need, taking this oath will be devastating, and I've seen it myself. Crowley writes in the Confessions that taking initiation, in and of itself with a stable person, is like kicking a hornet's nest. Every lurking pitfall of their unconscious mind is going to come to the forefront and inevitably drop them hard. That if they take this oath while carrying a ton of baggage, the weight of it is going to crush them. Then we come to the first statement of purpose of the oath, quote, to prosecute the great work, end quote. To initiation and follow through and work towards accomplishing the great work. But what is the great work? It's a large concept, but in short we could describe its phases in a Thelemic context. First, to gain self-knowledge, to work and attain the fullest powers of all paths and Sephiroth on the Tree of Life, to attain the knowledge and conversation with the Holy Guardian Angel, to cross the abyss, to attain all phases of Samadhi and union with the Divine in Kether, and then finally to attain Nirvana. And this last part may be postponed by the Bodhisattva, who rejects Parinirvana until all of mankind has first attained it. In other words, they choose to rapidly incarnate over and over in order to help enlighten all of mankind before they themselves get that great reward of peace and rest. But that is few compared to who would just go back into the source, in my opinion. So ordinarily a normal person's great work, which very few actually make it that far, all the way to Kether, you know, even Magus, we don't have that many recorded Magus who have received the logos of God and uttered their word that has changed mankind in that capacity. Few make it that far, but I believe most of them go back into Nirvana. You know, I can't say for certain. I don't know where Crowley or Krishna or whoever, any of the other, Muhammad, I don't know whether they've reincarnated or are gonna reincarnate or if they've just gone into Nirvana. But my guess is, like the Buddha went into Nirvana. That's recorded in Buddhist texts. So my guess is most of them did not take bodhisattva vows of any type. So back to the probationer oath. This oath describes this phase of the probationer who prosecutes the great work by, quote, obtaining a scientific knowledge of the powers of their own being, end quote. Now the next line invokes the power of AA to help them. In my view, I believe that AA has an egregore of its own. And I look at an egregore as a current, like what we call the 93 current, that could be an egregore. And so the AA is a separate egregore, maybe even within this 93 current. So if you think of a big line of energy, a big tube of energy, there's a smaller tube of AA's egregore held within that 93 current. And there's other magical orders and other ways to do magic that are thelemic that all have their own type of egregore. So it's like a current, a source of energy that is moving, and you're able to tap into it and flow with that source of energy. So I believe AA has an egregore, and this egregore has power in and of itself in line with Thelema, but also all of the magus of AA, who possibly remain on the spiritual planes, are capable of giving aid to the candidate to perform their great work through this, tapping into this egregore. And this works by this egregore, this energy, the power of AA, the power of Thelema, when you're doing the great work, it helps events line up in favor. Just as a magician needs something and it might seemingly be impossible to attain it, it arrives right on cue. Bam! Example in my life, my true will, or at least a part of my will at the time, was to transition. I had no clue how I was going to pay $50,000 for a bottom surgery, $5,000 to $20,000 for top surgery, hormone replacement. None of this was covered by health insurance. But the second I came out, it was part of my great work. It was part of my individual great work to manifest my true nature. Suddenly, laws in New York changed. Medicaid and all New York state insurances had to cover hormone replacement. So I trusted the process. I accepted that, okay, this is where I'm at right now. I could get on hormones, so I did. Then my next concern became, how am I going to pay for these surgeries? And as soon as I had done about a year and a half of hormones, bam, the law changed again. And right on time, you had to be on hormones between 1 to 3 years, depending on your case-by-case basis. So I had just hit a year and a half. I was eligible for surgery, and they changed the law again. The powers of the Lima, the powers that be, the powers of the universe, the power of doing the great work literally changed the laws. It made things that seemingly were impossible. And my $50,000 surgery I got within a year. I got on the list. I saw my doctors. I did my consultations, and I've gotten both surgeries, all paid for through my health insurance. So it's really an amazing thing. Whatever your will is, you have the inertia of the universe to assist you. Much more if you're joining a magical order, and such as AA, it actually aids you in that performance of your great work. It's just remarkable how it happens. Whether it's Magus, whether it's just the Lima 93 current, whether it's all of these things working to help you do your will, you doing your will is going to help change the world. It's going to affect everybody around you in a more positive way, and it might even inspire others that see you living in happiness because you're doing your will, be inspired to do something that they were scared to do initially that they need to do. So this particular magical oath of the probationer is sealed with a promise at the end. Quote, reverence, duty, sympathy, devotion, fidelity, trust do I bring to the AA. End quote. This promise seals a contract that the AA will lend its wisdom and aid in return for the initiate, bringing to the table these things, reverence, duty, sympathy, etc. Finally, the oath states that in 1 year they may be admitted past the grade of probationer as a neophyte of the order. Usually it takes much more than a year these days, but I think back in Crowley's time it was probably more common to only take a year. The initiate signs their legal name and then chooses a magical motto. And side note, stay tuned, as the very next video I make will probably be a walk magic video on the concept of choosing a magical motto and the differentiating of a magical name from a magical motto. So, notice 2 more things about the AA Probationer Oath. Firstly, the 4 circles, the 1 below and 3 above the main body of the text, are for wax seals to be stamped by 4 members of the grades of the order from Tifereth, 5 equals 6, Gabora, 6 equals 5, Chesed, 7 equals 4, up to Bina, 8 equals 3, a master of the temple. So I believe that these original wax seals that Crowley's and his initiates used back in the day were lost, from what I heard. But I do know people have been talking about actually making new representations based on what the seal waxes looked like, so recreating them, which I think is pretty cool. So the second thing is the 4 corners of the oath has 3 sets of word in each corner, and each word starts with either an L, a P, or a D. Each L and D word balance each other, such as in the top right, life and death. And each P word is an intermediary or consequence of the two, such as putrefaction for life and death. It's a consequence of life, and it's a process after death. It's a mediary between the two, or it's a consequence in this case. Note that L is Lamed, the scales, P is Pe, Mars, and D, Daleth, is Venus. So you have the scales, Mars, and Venus, LPD. So, the idea is balance of opposites of the male and female properties, and this indicates a vital aspect of the great work, the uniting of opposites. Especially more important is to note that every person has qualities of both the active and passive within them, and perfecting all of these is vital to initiation as a Thelemite. Each set of these 3 words is within a triangle. The 4 triangles represent the 4 sides of a pyramid, and that insinuates that the main body of the text represents the base of the pyramid, assigned to the 5th power of the Sphinx to go. Also, the base of the pyramid is the foundation of the magician, much as the oath is the foundation of the initiate. So from probation on, one who takes this oath is bound to it for the rest of their life. I don't know if it goes beyond this incarnation, possibly. It sets one up to discovering and doing their true will. All subsequent oaths in AA all add on to this initial work, getting a scientific knowledge of who they are, and then it comes with later on taking the knowledge of self and creating it into action, doing one's will. And it allows the person to become more and more refined with the work they do and the oaths they take in the future. Now, let's move on from this particular oath. One may also take personal oaths, such as Crowley gave examples of for himself about love and doing his great work and whatnot, poverty. To each person I say, take what oaths you will, but do so extremely cautiously, as it is no light step. As said, your oaths bind you to them for the rest of your life, and some oaths go beyond into future incarnations. So make sure taking it is in conformity with your will as a magician. I want to just reiterate, I've taken oaths in OTO, I've taken oaths in AA, and I've taken oaths in my current order, two current orders, the ASA, which I still practice through, and my teacher was William Wheeler. I've spoken about him. And that's been one of the most impactful oaths. It's given me the most in doing my great work, more than any of the other ones. Although this last one has also done a great deal. It's constantly been a driving force, and that's in the Lamp of the Invisible Light, the Congregation of Lamp of Invisible Light. And I'm not going to talk about that oath publicly right now. It is taken publicly in a public ritual, and how we do it is pretty cool. Maybe I'll speak about that another time. But yeah, ASA and the congregation, those two oaths have really done a lot. ASA has really propelled me forward in my great work on a magical note, doing ritual magic and pursuing advancement of grades, whereas in the congregation, it's actually made me slow down and really deliberate on the actions I take and how it affects not only me, but those that I interact with. So it's made me a much more self-conscious person about how I interact with people, how I affect people. So it's been a very, it's had, both of them have had profound effects on me. I can't say I've had good experiences with the AA lineage that I had chosen, and I did not have good experiences either with initiation nor with the oaths that I took in OTO. I found both of them to be lacking, at least where I was in my magical practice. Perhaps if I had advanced further in the orders than I had, maybe further grade work would have been better, maybe further oaths would have been more in line with where I was at, but I had already done a lot of work in ASA, and I was well advanced beyond where I took my oaths in OTO and AA at the time, so it was completely lacking, for me. It might help somebody who's newer to magic, to take probationer oaths, and etc., man of oath, triad oaths, and whatnot, but, so those didn't affect me the same way these other two did. I've taken my own personal vows, my own personal oaths, and, like Libra Astarte, I've taken the Bodhisattva vow. I believe I've taken it in many incarnations, and during a certain phase of my great work, I needed to take it, and I just knew this was something I had already done, so I'm already bound to it. I just needed to renew the vow for myself this incarnation. It was already done. It's not that I needed to do it, but I just felt it was proper to redo it. And yeah, they all have had their effect. I categorize and keep all of my occult documentation is very organized. I keep it in either physical journals, and those are all organized on shelves where I know where what I'm looking for is when I need it, and I have a very concise Google Drive. So I have one folder in Google Drive with copies of all of my oaths, so that from time to time I go back and I review what oaths I've taken and make sure that I'm fine-tuning myself and that I'm living up to them, and that I'm not, lacking in any way. I've never broke oath formally, don't intend to, but there have been times where I could have been doing more to refine myself as a magician or a person, and so from time to time I go back, I look at the oaths, and I see where can I tweak some stuff in my personal life or in my magical practice to make me get more out of those oaths than I was getting at the time. And so now I'm going to close with the final two paragraphs of the chapter, and it's of Crowley reflecting upon his oaths to allow no human affection to hinder him. Quote, "Yet more awful is the doom that he hath invoked upon himself in renouncing his right as a man to enjoy the love of those whom he loves with passion so selfless, so pure, and so intense in return for the power so to love mankind, that he be chosen to utter the word of the aeon for his sake, for their sake, his reward, universal abhorrence, being hated by everybody, bodily torment, mental despair, and moral paralysis. Yet he who hath power over death, with breath to call back health, with a touch to beckon life, he must watch his own children waste away month by month, aware that his art may not anywise avail, who hath sold the signet ring of his personal profit to buy him a plain gold band for the felon finger of his bride, that worn widow, the world. End quote. It's interesting. This is not in my script. This is just something that's occurring to me. You know, Crowley didn't get to see a lot of what his great work did and how it impacted people. Yeah, I'm just a kid that was born in Brooklyn that was seeking spirituality over a decade ago. And I happened to get lucky enough in prison to be searching as hard as I was and find Wicca, which directly led me to a Thelemite who told me everything I needed to know about the beginning phases of the great work of Thelema, what books to look into, but also I was able to come out to in prison that as a trans person, and they had so much information about being trans. They were there to guide me. If it wasn't for Crowley, this person would not have been identifying as a Thelemite, would not have been in the Wiccans, because he would still have been a Protestant Gnostic. He practiced Protestantism, but from a Gnostic point of view, until he found Thelema, and then he converted permanently. Or she now, but at the time, they gave this person 10 years, 12 years ago. It was he back then, it's now she. So she, you know, if it were not for Crowley's great work, would not have been able to teach me about the Book of the Law and Hermetic Kabbalah and the beginning steps of what the elements are and what they look like and how they mess around on the tree of life and the importance of all of that stuff. And then tell me, when you get out of here, just go read the Book of the Law. Go read this book list on Hermetics. You know, it's really profound how Crowley's great work affected me. He didn't get to see any of this. In fact, right after he died, Thelema almost went with him. You know, there was only a handful of people still practicing, and it was very small. Thankfully, Grady reinitiated the OTO at that time, which gave a breath of life back into that order, which it's degenerated, in my opinion, again. However, it did allow enough people to meet each other to keep Thelema alive and to grow. And I know Thelema has affected so many people's lives. And so it's just, he didn't get to see this. He thought it was probably going to fail, you know, but he knew he needed to do this work even if he wasn't going to see the fruits of his labor. And that's what sometimes doing the great work is. Sometimes you just need to do things that you're never going to experience the benefits of. Sometimes that's doing your will. We always want to do stuff that we get the gratitude for doing, or we get some type of monetary return for, and sometimes that's not the case. How many artists make money on their paintings after they died? And it's only valuable because they can no longer produce anything. So it's kind of like that in some cases as a magician. We're trying to be of service to humanity, to help enlighten the world and bring them into the next phase of evolution, both on a physical, mental, and spiritual level, or not both, but on all three levels. And, you know, as magicians doing this work, we don't get to see the fruits of our labor sometimes. Crowley damn sure didn't. And so it sent him into a deep depression that he, you know, felt like he wasted his life. Maybe he should have done things different. But he spent his life writing, and he published enough books to keep the occult alive and well and bring Thelema to all of us that are listening to this YouTube channel right now. So in that, you know, I'm grateful to the prophet. I'm grateful to the great beast. So this is the power of magical oaths. He swore to do his great work, and he did it. And if it wasn't for taking those oaths and fulfilling them, being bound to this magical path for his life, doing his great work, I wouldn't have had the life-changing experiences. I wouldn't have the loving partner that I have in my life. You know, I wouldn't have a lot of things. So I'm grateful for magical oaths, and they're a powerful thing. Love is the law, love and the will. I'll see you all in the next one.